Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us. Today we're talking about displacement in Redshift. Displacement can be a bit tricky if you are not familiar with it. This lesson will be split up into 3 parts: the quick answer, the more in-depth answer, and recreating the cover page. So let's jump in and see what it's all about. Okay, so today we are talking about displacement with inside Redshift. Now, there's a ton of information out there on displacement. It's probably not that hard for you to figure out. If you're a Redshift user, you can probably get results that'll work for you. So why are we talking about it? Well, I found when I was early in my Redshift career that I didn't fully understand it, and that I didn't really understand what I was doing. I didn't understand what the values meant, and some of them were just kind of cryptic. So I figure if I didn't understand it, then chances are there is probably some people in the community that may have used it but don't fully understand what they're doing. So just know that if you are this video is going to be broken into 3 separate parts, right? So the first part is going to be if you've never used displacement and you just want the quick answer. I'm going to give you the quick answer, and I'm not going to give you an explanation. I'm just going to show you how to get stuff displaced. The second part is going to be the explanation. I'm not going to lie, it's going to be pretty in-depth. A little more technical than I normally go, but I think you kind of have to be for this. So buckle up for that. Hopefully it doesn't get too boring, but I think if you watch it, hopefully I know you'll come out with a better understanding of what the hell you're doing when you're displacing stuff. And then the third part is going to be more of a real world example where I'm going to show you how to make the cover page quite quickly, but I think it would still be nice to show something more interesting than just the cube or the plane. So without further ado, let's do it. So let's say that you have never displaced before. How do you do that? All right, well, with displacement, as we all know or might not know, you need something to drive your displacement. You need to tell the material what is actually a displacer. So what I did is I created just a noise texture with a cell shader, and I piped it into a Redshift texture. Now you can use any displacement texture. The big thing to know is that based on what kind of texture you have, you might have to switch the settings, which I will show you in just a second. In our case, we are going to go and we are going to search for displacement. And we are going to pipe in our texture to the texture map. All right, now inside the texture map, we have a few options. We have a scale, height, and space type. So really, most of these you don't have to worry about. There'll be a little bonus thing I'll show you here at the end. But scale and your height field, right? So basically, if you're dealing with a black and white image, you just want a straight up height field, but sometimes you have a vector image, and if you do, you want to switch this to vector. In our case, we want to stick with height. All right, so let's take this displacement and let's actually pipe it into the output, not the material, but the output, and let's pipe it into displacement, okay? Now, for now, I'm going to close this. And let's hit the play button and see what happens. Right away, nothing happens. And the reason why nothing happens is we need to put a Redshift tag and a Redshift object. Okay, without any explanation, all you do, you hit override, enable tessellation, and then enable displacements. Right away, you're going to get your displacement. You can play around these settings and figure out what works for you. If you want the quick answer, that's the quickest answer I can give you. All right, that's part 1. I told you it wasn't going to be in depth. All right, so for part 2, I'm going to actually explain what the heck all this means and what we're doing. So, all right, so we obviously just put this on, and we got results. We are now seeing our shader here, and it's coming through. There's a lot of things that were happening in between, right? So with displacement, in Redshift, you have a few options on how powerful it can be, right? So with displacement, always your power is going to be driven from your map. All right, that's the first thing to know if you're not too familiar with it. White will always be like 100%, and black will always be 0%, and gray is everything in between. So this is going to be your first indicator of how things should look, right? Past that, in the tag, you have something called, and I'm going to go in order of operation of what I think is the most important. Past that, you have your displacement scale. Now, displacement scale is also power. So it's basically that map that I just showed you. How powerful do I actually want that map to be, right? Do I want it to be super powerful or just not too powerful? What's the balance I want? Okay, so that's your power. That's how much power you're willing to fuel, you're willing to put in the tank, I guess. Now, maximum displacement is, I think, where probably a lot of people maybe might get confused, and I for sure did. All right, so what maximum displacement is it's actually using real world units. So whatever the units are of your scene is what it's using. So in my case, I'm using centimeters. So this means that the maximum displacement I can make is 1 centimeter. 1 centimeter is not very high. So what's happening is I'm not getting much of a displacement. Okay, well, I'm not getting much of a displacement, so I'll just crank the power up, right? Okay, well, I'm kind of getting it, right? So where am I now? This is kind of looks like shit. This almost looks like a bump map. Why does it look like a bump map? Well, because what's happening is I'm pumping a lot of power in it, but, you know, I guess Papa Redshift here is saying that I can only go to 1 centimeter. So what would happen if we said, Dad, please let me get a little higher? I didn't think I'd be saying that today. Dad, let me get higher. All right, son, go to 20, whatever. All right, so let's say you can go to 20 now. Okay, so what's that mean? So all of a sudden I can go to 20. Well, to demonstrate, if I take a cube, and let's take this cube and let's set its height to 20, and let's see what happens. All right, and let's set its height to 20, and right now it's not actually on the floor. It's going a little below. So let's set it to the floor, and you're going to see that now it's exactly the same, right? It's clipping at 20. Same thing if I go to 40, and then I set my cube to 40, and I drop it to the ground. Exactly the same. It clips at the exact same part. So that's the real thing that tripped me up, to be honest. That's what tripped me up with this. It was like, what the hell are these two different settings for? I didn't understand what was happening. So just know this is your maximum displacement, and then I can keep going up, and eventually my power will run out, so I have to give it more power. So that's where it becomes a dance, and you have to figure out what works for you. The next thing I want to touch on is you will notice that if we look at this from the side here, yeah. All right, so if I look at this, my floor plane is right here, right? My floor plane is right here, excuse me, my world plane, my grid. My grid is right here, 0 is right here, but nothing's going down. Like if I have black, those negative values should be going down. Everything's only going up. Nothing's actually going down. The reason why that is because with certain textures, they don't support negative values, right? So if you have like an 8-bit or 16-bit texture, it's not going to support a negative value. So you actually have to tell it to go negative. So for instance, on this C4D shader, I need to tell my Redshift displacement that it needs to go negative. I need to remap it. And that's where this change range comes in. So if I set this to -1, minimum being black, my new minimum range is -1, then all of a sudden you're going to see that, as you would expect, now it actually goes down, right? Before it didn't go down, now it's actually going down. So just know that, like, yeah, if you're not working with EXRs or like some sort of like really professional, you get it from Quixel or something, those should all be set up properly. But like if you're just kind of building it yourself, just know that it's not going to react the same way that you want it to. So that's pretty important in my opinion. You should always be compensating for that. Maybe sometimes you don't want to go negative, but all right. So on to the next. All right. So that's in a nutshell displacement. But I do remember, if you recall, there was actually a scale in here. So what does this mean? So actually, let's not do 20 and 80. Let's try to do like let's do 40 and 40. Okay. So right now we're able to go 40 high. Let's just go ahead and get our cube back. Let's get our cube back and let's set it to 40, and then let's drop it to the floor so we know that works. It's perfect. And then, so now, the highest thing goes 40. So what is this other scale doing? So all this other scale is doing, it's multiplying it. So if you take this and you hit, if I put this to 2, it's going to multiply 40 times 2. So the displacement scale, it's going to multiply by 2. So you're going to see nothing's going to happen. If it does, it's very minor with the clipping here. But what it's actually doing is it's putting it to 80, right? So now if I go to 80 here, and I put this to 80 and I drop it to the floor, then you can see once again we have the exact same thing. So Yeah, again, this is something that also confused me. It was like, I don't get it. There's two scales. This is multiplying it. And this can also come in handy too. Like let's say that you are using this texture on multiple objects. Well, this is kind of nice because let's say those objects all have their own individual displacements settings on the tags. Well, you can come in here and say, oh, I want everything to be up a little bit, and it just kind of multiplies them all. So this, one of these can control multiple ones also. All right, so that's all that does. So let's actually set this back to 1. So that way we're with numbers we understand. Let's go 20 maybe, and let's just hide our cube for now. All right, so that is displacement. Now, the thing that is also kind of challenging and you really do need to understand is tessellation. So tessellation is basically subdividing your original piece of geometry. That's essentially what it's doing. It's creating more geometry for you. So for this part of the lesson, I would like to come in here and I would like to create a wireframe, and let's just put it on the diffuse color. Okay, that way we can actually see what we're doing. All right, so right now this object has 40 by 40 by nature, just like straight out of the can. So 40 here, 40 here, excuse me, 20 here and 20 here. But yeah, when you put on tessellation, it's basically making more, right? It's creating more. So how do you control these? Like, what the hell does this all mean? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in the order of importance. Okay, so the order of importance, in my opinion, would be your maximum subdivisions. Okay, for your maximum subdivisions, I'm actually going to switch this object off because I want to show it to you very simplistic. So for your maximum subdivisions, let's just say that you have this cube here, right? And each side has one face. So it just has one side on each face. Now, when I come in here and I set my maximum subdivisions to 1, let's see what happens. I think it got frozen here. Sometimes it does this. Yeah, sorry. Sometimes it trips up. Anyways, when you set it to 1, it actually divides it by 4, right? So it's like it creates 4, polygons. It subdivides it and it creates 4. And then when you go to 2, create 16. So you have 4 by 4, so you have 16, and so on. So basically what it's doing is it's multiplying it by 4 every time. And actually, yeah, they have this in the documentation. I actually have the things here. So yeah, if you have a setting of 2, it goes to 16. If you have 3, it goes to 64, and so on. But you got to imagine, you got to be really careful with this because the higher you go, I mean, you have multiple polygons in geometry. So, you know, if you go too high, you're going to get yourself into trouble. So let's just set it back to the defaults. And let's say that we're done with this for now. So now that we know that, let's see what that means for this. So right now we have it set to 6. So that basically means, yeah, it'll, whatever 6 was. I don't know what 6 was. Did I close it? Oh, I closed it. Well, whatever it was, we have 6 and it's multiplied, by however many times by 4. So it's creating a lot of new geometry is the moral of that. There's quite a bit more that it's creating. Okay, so next important is minimum edge length. So minimum edge length is actually kind of a tricky one. And basically how you can think about it is you have to think about this as pixels. So what Redshift is saying, it's saying if this edge length is larger than 4 pixels, I want you to subdivide it. Okay, if it's larger than that, subdivide it. If it's less than that, do not subdivide it. So if I put in more, you would think, I guess I'm like for normal rational thinking, you would think you would get more, but you actually get less because now it's saying every 6 pixels. So therefore, you're going to get less and less edges because you have a wider range that it's looking at. But if you go less, so if I said every 2 pixels, then I get really dense geometry. And that's because every 2 pixels, as long as this edge width, the original edge width, the original before it was subdivided, is 2 pixels, then you will get a subdivision that happens. Okay. So the general rule of thumb is this is your power. This is how much gas you're willing to put in the tank. And then, yeah, this is kind of like mom or dad telling you how much you can spend, I guess. So right now you can spend 4. Yeah, so it's a little tricky, but it's really not, to be honest. It's not that bad. But like, why even do that? Why pixels? That doesn't make sense. The reason why it's pixels is because it's doing something called screen space adaptation. Now, screen space adaptation is something that if you notice here, we have this like line that's happening. There's this hard line that's happening where it's very dense geometry, and then it goes to less dense geometry. Same here, we have very dense geometry here, and then it gets less here. Why is that happening? Well, screen space adaptation is basically constantly calculating the distance from your camera to this piece of geometry and saying, hey, how much tessellation do I have to pump in here to make it look good, to make it look like these settings, you know, like to get it to these settings that are as good as that. And naturally, you can imagine that if something is further away, it's taking up less pixels, right? So like you need less information to build it. Whereas if something's close, you have a lot more pixels that it needs to fill in, basically, as a general blanket statement. So that's kind of what it's doing. It's like, all right, well, if it's close, it's going to need more, right? Which is 90% of the time true. And then you can see kind of here in the middle, it becomes less and less, right? So if I come here and I zoom really far out, you'll see that we start to lose. I mean, of course, you're going to have a minimum, but you're going to start to, everything's just going to kind of become the same because you're just at the same distance. And yeah, maybe there might be some here and there, but yeah, it's basically saying that I don't need that information, so I'm not going to use it. So it's smart. You can think of it as being smart. So that's what that's doing. It's constantly recalculating. Now, let's say you don't want to recalculate. Let's say you have an animation or something, and that recalculation is maybe not making your animation look nice. Or let's say you have a very high-res shoe that's just going to be used for a still, something like that. And you want the best quality you can possibly get. Well, what you can do is you can turn off screen space adaptive. And what it's going to do is it's going to make everything exactly the same. So it's going to be uniform throughout. All the subdivisions are going to be uniform. There's going to be no recalculation. All right, so, but why did it get bigger? Okay, it got bigger because it's no longer calculating pixels. It's calculating your world units. So if you remember earlier, we were in centimeters. So basically now it's saying every 4 centimeters, if you're bigger than 4 centimeters, I'm going to subdivide you. Whereas before it was if you're every 4 pixels, I'm going to subdivide you. And in this situation, a pixel is much smaller than a centimeter, right? So therefore your subdivisions are less. Now, that all sounds confusing, and I know it kind of is. If you've never done it, it's a lot to absorb. But again, the general rule of thumb is less is more for this. So it doesn't really change. As long as you just remember that if I go less, then I will get more subdivisions. So next, let's talk about out of Frustum tessellation factor. Okay, so once again, big cryptic words if you don't know them, but all Frustum is basically what the camera can see, right? So your Frustum is essentially this cone that's happening here, this like pyramid that's happening. So yeah, it's just what the camera can see. So what does that mean? So that basically means that anything that the camera doesn't see, how much geometry are you willing to give it, right? So how much geometry are you actually willing to give the geometry that's not being seen? All right, so right now we're set to 4. Okay, so that means like everything that's outside of here, we're willing to give it a tessellation factor of 4. All right, so if you come up here, you can freeze your your tessellation, and then you can kind of, what it's going to do is it's not going to try to continually do the screen space adaptive. So let's come out here and let's just see what it looks like when we pull out. So you can see here the stuff that was off screen. Actually, you know what? I'm going to come in here. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to set a keyframe. And then let's go over here. So this way we can compare every time. You can kind of see that it's not giving it as much information because it's off camera, because we're willing to do that. All right, so let's see what happens if we go to, let's say, oh, you know what? Let's just max it out. Whatever, let's just max it out. And then let's unfreeze and then freeze again. And let's go to our back. Let's go back to our second position. Now you can see when we max it out, we're not giving it much at all, basically. It's just saying like, hey, I don't want you to give it much at all geometry back there. There doesn't need to be much of anything because I'm not seeing it. And then, of course, if we go back to our original position and we set it to 1, and then we freeze or unfreeze and freeze. Let's come back out. Now you see we have a pretty dense mesh, and you can see there's a fall off that's happening. But you might be saying like, well, why? You're not seeing it. Who gives a crap? Like, what's it matter? Well, think of it this way. If you have reflections or something, then that geometry actually does matter. So that's why the computer is calculating it, because, I mean, it's the real world. Like, stuff gets seen, you know, in reflections, and they all interact together. So yeah, so that's pretty much what that does. Okay, so next is the limit out of Frustum tessellation, and this is basically just, yeah, it's putting like a cap on how many subdivisions you're willing to give it. So to demonstrate, let's refresh, let's go out, let's take a picture. So this is what we have now. Let's see what happens when we limit it. So let's go back in, let's go out. Okay, and then let's compare. So not much happens, right? It's pretty much exactly the same, because those, once again, we're at the default setting, so that's intentional, I'm sure. But what would happen if we set this to a lesser number, right? So what would happen if we set this to like 1 or something? So let's unfreeze and then freeze again, and then let's go to our second position. Now you see we have once again limited, you know, what it used to be. So it's just another way of limiting your subdivisions. It's basically how many subdivisions you're willing to give it. So the higher you go, the more subdivisions you're willing to give it. The lower, the less subdivisions you're willing to give it. And then, yeah, past that, there's really not much more to this. There is smooth subdivisions, and smooth subdivisions is basically, well, let me just show you, let me just show you this way. So smooth subdivisions is, if you watch these corners, basically what it is it doesn't round things off. I think the best way to show this is with a cube. So let's go over here and let's go to my cube. Let's turn this back on, and I'm going to turn on smooth subdivisions. Basically, it rounds out your corners. That's essentially what it does. So sometimes you want that, sometimes you don't. You know, if you're doing a wall or something, you probably don't want that. So it just makes things smoother, is all it does. And then, yeah, the last one is just a subdivision rule, which I never use. And basically all this is for is like, if you're using a software package that doesn't support loop subdivisions, then you would just switch it to the Catmull-Clark only. But I've never had to switch it, so maybe you might run into it, but I pretty much never mess with that. And I think that brings us to the end of part 2. I mean, it's been a lot of information, I know. Yeah, that's right. Excuse me. There's actually one last one, and this one's pretty important. And the last one is enable bump mapping. So for this one, I actually got like a proper texture from Quixel, and it's just of like a brick wall. And what we have here under displacement is enable auto bump mapping. So that's kind of what you think it is. So let's just see. So it's on right now. Let's see what happens when we turn it off. When we turn it off, things get really soft and just not as nice to look at. Okay, so again, when we turn it on, much more texture, much more beautiful, right? Now, to get back to this, we would, of course, have to increase all of our subdivisions, right? It would just take a lot, and we don't really want to do that. So this is a cheat. It seems like it's a cheat to me, where they're somehow doing something with bump maps, and you can just make it look nicer by clicking that button. So I think that one is very important. I don't know why I saved it for last, but always leave it on. Okay, so that does it for part 2. Now for part 3, I am going to quickly run you through the cover page. All right, so for part 3, I wanted to run through quickly the cover page and show you how I made this. This will cover the displacement settings I use, but not only that, but also just the lighting setup that I had. So yeah, all right, so a lot of things happening, but really not a lot of things happening. Really, it's a lot of things that are being used over and over and over again and just repositioned. So being that this is a displacement tutorial, I think it only makes sense to talk about the displacement first. So what I have is 2 separate things happening here. I have a scene where I have these planes that are happening, right? And then also these cubes in the back, and that's essentially the same displacement map, same texture, etc. And then I have these evil Trump heads that are coming out of them, because the evil robot is morphing from him. That's essentially the two displacements that are happening. Now, if we look over here, I have some displacement that's happening on his face, but then I also have, of course, the walls that are happening. So the walls, if you don't know, are generated from something called JS placement. And JS placement is pretty cool. Basically, it just generates all these random patterns. There's a name for them. I just can't remember what they are. And you can do like a zillion different things. You can colorize them, whatever. You can just do the settings however you like, and it makes really cool things. So what you do is you save this out. It's a free program, by the way. You should download it. It's really rad. It saves you out a height map and a color map, right? So the height map and the color map look like this. If we come here, so I have a color map, which is driving my color, which I piped in with inside that third-party program. It gives you a normal map, which I'm actually not using on this, and then it gives you a displacement map, which I am using. So once again, this displacement map is a height map, so I don't have to worry about switching our settings within here. So if we go to our three objects that are using this, the walls, basically, they have this plane texture on it, and inside that plane texture, I'm piping in the diffuse, which is this one, into the diffuse color. It's the this guy. And then I'm also giving it a little bit of emissions, because emissions will kind of like help it brighten up a little bit. Oh no, actually I turned off the emissions, so never mind. I guess I'm not doing emissions. It looks like I was thinking about it at one point, but then I said, nope, don't want to do that. So not doing emissions, just straight up into a diffuse. I'm piping in a roughness texture, and then, which did not come with JS placement. This is actually something that I own. And then I have my displacement texture, which once again look like this, and that displacement texture is being run through, as we talked about before, the texture map into a height field. I kept it to 1, and then for each of these cubes, I set, you can see the minimum edge length. I went pretty heavy because I wanted to get like some decent detail out of it, and then I kept the subdivisions to 6. And then the scale I made, what I would consider to be, this is pretty high because I wanted them to kind of come off and feel like they were, protruding out really far. And then for the back walls, I pretty much use the same settings. I think maybe, I just made them a little bit less high is all it is. So the back walls are just, let's think in here. The back walls are the exact same settings. They're just less high. And this is where it can come in handy though. Let's say you just wanted to increase that overall. You can just come here and set your scale to 2 or 3 or 4, and it'll take all of this, everything that's using this texture, and make it higher. So that's all that's happening for the wall. Basically, it's very simple. It's 2 cubes and a plane, and I'm using the same texture displacing over it. Next, what I did was for the head, also quite simple, but all I did was I actually used the same shader that I used in our lesson. So I used this shader, and it's what we saw earlier. It just has a roughness texture going into it, and then I believe I have a flat, let me see what I put on here. So I'm just flat projecting it on here, so I can just get it like a piece. I'm flat projecting the texture onto his head, so I can just get like a piece of the face and not actually like distort the entire thing. So it's just like the side. So it's literally just a cell noise that's happening in here, and it's just trying to help it blend in just a little bit better. Next, man, that's it for displacement. It's super easy, but it goes a long way, right? So there's not much really to that other than that. I mean, my settings for the face, this is actually important. So for the face, you'll see what I did, because the face, I think this is actually real important. I should talk about this. So the face itself is something that has a lot of geometry to begin with, so you don't really want to add too much more to it, or else you're going to get some really crazy results. And honestly, this geometry is pretty crazy. So what I did basically is for the face, I left the minimum edge length really high because I don't want much detail in there, because it already has so much detail that I don't need to add any more. And I put the maximum subdivisions pretty low because, again, we've already got so much detail. You don't need much more. That's something to consider if you already have a piece of geo that's pretty well sculpted. And then let's talk about the lights. I know this isn't a lesson on lights, but why not? All right, so for the lights, I'm just gonna run them. I'm not gonna run through the theory. I'm just gonna run through them. For the lights, what we have is we have, turn everything off. We have a few happening here. So once it comes up to speed, I can show you everything. All right, so for the lights, we have a top light that's giving him a little bit of shape, right? It's kind of just like lighting it from above. If we come here, you can see it's kind of lighting it from above. And then I have a kicker light, and that kicker light is actually, if we come over here, turn this on and off. Kicker light's not doing as much as I thought. So maybe, yeah, like I said, sometimes you start these things. Let me just turn it up and see what my intentions were. Sometimes you start these things and yeah, so I originally intended on like kind of spotlighting him out, but I think I abandoned that. So the kicker light is actually not doing as much as I thought it was. So I guess that one is not too important. Key light. So I wanted this to be my focal point. So what I did is I put a key light that kind of like hits the side of his face. So you're kind of like, hopefully your eye's drawn to it. So that's what that one's doing. And I have another key light that's really brightening up his face. Because once again, I'm hoping that people look here. And then, yeah, I have the temperature set to blue on these. So these are both set to like a really high temperature, so blue. And then I have a bottom light that's set to red actually, right? Because I want it to feel kind of evil. And usually if something's lit from the bottom, and it's red, it's gonna feel kind of like evil, I feel. So I chose to make this red and put it at the bottom. And then these last lights are basically just to really get something out of this back here. So if we turn this top back, you're gonna see this is what's creating my my environment light. I do have a Redshift environment here, and then I'm also having a rim light in here, so we can just kind of get a little bit like, yeah, I guess this one's even more powerful. This is also creating environment and just get us some shape back there. It's really about shape and trying to create some sort of shape back there for them. And then past that, yeah, this rim light again is blue. So I wanted to have mostly blue and then some hints of red where like kind of the evil stuff was happening. And then, yeah, the camera just has bokeh set to it. I actually have a custom bokeh that's on there. And then I believe that's everything. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. I know this was a long one, but I hope that was helpful, and I will see you on the next one.